Welcome everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Pathways to Insight, or PTI podcast. I've got my lovely co-host Mary with me. Say hello, Mary.
Hi, everyone.
I guess some quick background. Myself and Mary have decided to put together a podcast where, selfishly we get to learn, right? I guess that was the idea, where we can have discussions, learn, and
chatting.
Just chat, and talk about what's happening in industry or in general, and learn from other experts. And then hopefully it's of benefit to other people as well. Regardless, we're going to talk because we like to talk, and every time we speak on the phone, we end up talking for what? Maybe an hour?
Too long.
Too long? Oh, God.
Yeah. Distract ourselves from the work we need to do.
So what we thought we would do is obviously start with each other in terms of just talking to each other about what we do and our experiences in the industry, and talk through that side. Just off the bat, Mary, maybe we can start with a little bit of your background, what led you into psychology, and actually probably a good idea to just generally introduce yourself, because I've just skipped past all that.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Mary Girgis. I'm a clinical psychologist. And I guess, how did I get here? So, well, to start off with, I had absolutely zero idea what I wanted to do with life when I was in high school. I figured
Does anyone know what they want to do at that time?
Well, apparently in my high school, everyone did.
Oh, right.
So I was left out. I had absolutely zero idea. Like every couple of weeks, I was changing my mind, and then eventually I landed on psych. And I just fell in love with it. Partially also because I just don't have an ability to quit. So even though I didn't initially like it, I just sort of stuck with it, and thankfully it worked out because it ended up being not too bad. And then I just kind of bounced around from job to job. I started off in forensics, and then I went to the children's hospital, and then did some private practice stuff, and then eventually I moved into the NDIS space, and I just fell in love. Like, it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for, because I just find that working within the NDIS space is quite complicated. And it really keeps you on your toes, and things are constantly changing, and there is no opportunity to kind of like become like I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you can't go into autopilot here. Like, no. you can't get bored in that sense and go into autopilot, because things are just constantly shifting. And as stressful as that is, I find that it does kind of like scratch that itch for me. And I just love working, with this type of group. Like, my passion is working with people with intellectual disabilities, and that's basically 90% of the people that I see. And it's really quite fulfilling, and I love the advocacy part of it, and I love seeing the changes and the autonomy and the choice and control come out. So that's kind of that's how I got here, I guess.
so I guess you're already busy enough, right? Because you're a doctor as well, right? I don't think we mentioned that. Sorry, I know. Not something, but Dr. Mary Girgis.
Not medical, PhD, not medical.
Okay.
You don't understand how many times I have to tell people, like, just like an opening sentence, like, I'm not a doctor. I cannot advise.
But you have the title.
I have the title, yeah.
You're already busy enough, right? Like, you've got your NDIS practice, you've got a growing business. When it comes to working with NDIS, I guess one of the questions I think I would personally like to know is what made you kind of want to do this podcast together? Like, what was, I guess, one of the motivating factors where you're like, yeah, I think this would be good? Like, what's...
Well, I guess, I've always enjoyed our chats, really. We met randomly through a colleague, and it was just, I felt like it's nice to kind of chat to someone who kind of like is on the same wavelength, which is really nice. And like, this role is like at least the way that I work is, it's quite isolating. So it's always nice to kind of have a break from the day and have a chat with another colleague. And I guess selfishly, like, if we're being really, really, really honest, I just love to learn. And I'm super curious, and I just want to hear all the different perspectives and to learn. And in the journey of doing that, I hope to also like facilitate learning for other people. And how can we together increase our knowledge base whilst simultaneously sort of helping the participants that we serve. Because at the end of the day, that's really how that knowledge is useful. Because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not kind of like actively driving towards something, it's not helpful in any sense. So I'm hoping that I can advocate better for my
Mm.
participants. I know that just speaking between us, like you've given me sort of advice on how to approach certain things, and they're not even mutual clients. It's just sort of vague questions that I've just thrown your way, and it's actually been really helpful, and it's really changed the way that I work. And I just want more of that, really.
And it's super important. I mean, I guess you would agree, maybe in your particular position as a psychologist, that collaboration and learning from each other, not only about, like, I guess from a more clinical and therapeutic sense, but also about participants in general, because we work with humans, right? So just that idea that we should all be discussing, chatting consistently, learning from each other, and not having I guess, a sense of, I mean, for lack of a better word, you can call it ego. Like, we don't know everything. We're never going to know everything,
Yeah.
and it should be okay for us to talk and learn, and in some cases be wrong, because like that is part of journey. Like, you're going to be wrong sometimes. You learn. You go, okay, I didn't know that. Now I know this, and obviously you shift.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, for sure. Like, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that you're wrong, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that you don't know. And you're totally right. Like, there's so many times where I've like just been seeing it through this like psych lens, and then someone will come in, like a support coordinator or an OT or a speech or something, and then they'll say something. I'm like, oh my gosh, my mind is blown. Like, I would have never considered that. And then you incorporate this new piece of information, and the changes that you can see in the quality of life for the
yeah.
participants it's just really like it's quite the privilege to be able to witness that.
I agree. Look, it is a complex space naturally. So I'm going to selfishly ask you some questions about psychology. Maybe a few in there that are a little cheeky, but I guess I just want to, I guess, again, learn from you and talk about this. And sometimes we've had these conversations as well. But I guess, can I start with how you would explain, because I know you do BSP and psychology, but can you explain the difference, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's the
um,
cheeky one. Sorry.
yeah, look, it's not a straightforward answer. I think.
Mhm.
Well, let me maybe let's start off with the obvious, right? So, a behavior support practitioner, they do a behavior support plan. A psychologist doesn't do that, and a behavior support practitioner will also be involved in restrictive practices, and the authorization of those restrictive practices, or facilitating rather, and monitoring the use of those restrictive practices. Psychology doesn't necessarily do any of that. If you think about it in terms of like more of a lens, right? So from a psychology perspective, your lens, your primary focus is through this kind of like one-to-one interaction with your participant,
Hmm.
and just working for the most part. This doesn't it's not always the case, but for the most part, you're just working with them, right? And then with BSP, it's more about working not so much with the participant themselves, and it's more about working with them, yes, but also with their whole team. And so like the equivalent would be, let's say for example, you have a married couple, and the participant comes to you as a psychologist, and they say, my husband yelled at me. So we could have a chat about like how can we cope with the fact that your husband is yelling at you, like what strategies can we put in place for you, what skills can we put in place for you. But then when you're doing BSP, it's more about, okay, well, I want to speak to the husband, and I want to see what's going on there, and how can I upskill the husband so that he's not yelling. How can I train up the staff around this person so that so that their responses aren't triggering a response in my participant. So it's a different lens that you're working through, and there are like different, like, well, there's also like different qualifications as well. Like a BSP can have like a very wide range of qualifications. Like psychologists are psychologists, they've done their undergrad, they've done some have done masters, that's
PhD.
their area of expertise. Yeah, and so that's kind of where it gets a little bit confusing, right? Because you can have psychologists that are also BSPs, but not all BSPs are psychologists. They have different sort of like professional backgrounds. Yeah.
So so are you saying that the BSP framework is more focused on the more, like, I guess, the community setting, or the service, the surrounding setting around the individual, to be supportive of that person's behaviors, rather than necessarily, I mean, would there still be an aspect of, adjusting a behavior directly with the person? Like,
Yeah. So that would fall under the skill building aspect of
uh,
BSP, right? So it just kind of like you want to think of it as tiers of support, right? So you might the first tier is let's get our foundation right. Let's get our environment right. Like what is it about this particular environment that's triggering? Um, and then you might want to go to level two, which is when you want to kind of add, okay, well, how can I facilitate like skill building for this person? And work on those types of strategies. And then tier three is kind of like, okay, let's bring in a specialist provider, like a psychologist or an OT or a speechy, and they can work on very focused strategies, sort of like within that field, right? So it's kind of like it's a stepped approach, if you will.
mm. And so I guess where my traditional and historic confusion has always been is, well, then like you've got a psychologist and then you've got a behavior support practitioner, and like I guess in what like when should it be a psychologist versus a behavior support practitioner? Because I mean, technically speaking, the NDIS is seeing them as two extremely different products. So, for lack of a better word, so you've got the BSP side, which traditionally, and I know has been, I guess, that tiered approach where you've got you adjust the setting. It could be situations where the behavior is not changing. You're changing the skill set around of the people around that person. But when should it be like psychology? And is psychology meant to be? Well, let's start with that, then I'll ask the next question because otherwise,
Okay, when should it be psychology? Is that the
yeah,
question? Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Sorry.
I think naturally if the like if we're talking specifically about the NDIS, it would be when they have a psychosocial disability, right? Like that's kind of our bread and butter as psychologists. Like that's kind of like all we do really. So I mean, that's what all I do. I don't want to speak for everyone else, but so it's yeah, so if you have a psychosocial disability, like if you've got sort of like, let's, for example, like what's the most common one that we see is like schizophrenia. You know,
Mhm.
it makes sense to have a psychologist on board, right? And then it's about then having a think about like the person's goals. What are they hoping to achieve, right? So for example, if you've got someone with schizophrenia and they have let's say a delusion about leaving the house, and part of their goal is to engage in social and economic participation, as is sort of like you see that sort of wording all the time throughout the NDIS, right? So a psychologist is really well placed to help someone manage their delusions with as well the assistance of mainstream services like psychiatrists, so that they can kind of like manage those delusions in order to go out into the world, right? Like that's what we're good at. Where BSP would be more appropriate is if you have let's say they live in a SIL, and you have and the interactions between the staff and the participant is causing some tension. Maybe there's some verbal aggression going on. That's where the BSP is well placed to then help manage the team, help manage their expectations. You're essentially focusing on the team. How can I train up this team so that it's not triggering this type of behavior? While the psychologist thinking, how can I train, like, how can I assist this person to develop their emotion regulation skills?
And I don't like. I mean, this is impossible to do, and I think you should always shy away from doing blanket statements naturally. But I'm going to try and do one anyway, because
Okay.
welcome to my brain. But I guess it sounds like to me that psychology is, I guess, more acutely focused on there's more of a direct link to the diagnosis, if that makes sense. So, like, for example, you're talking about schizophrenia where there's obviously, you've got those, I think you said delusions, right? Or is it
Yeah,
delusional? Is that the correct way of saying that?
delusions. Yeah,
Delusions.
delusions. Yeah.
Um, so you've got those delusions, and that's something that realistically only a psychologist can work with that person. But whereas BSP would be in that same scenario, you're more working with the community around that person to manage those
Yeah. Yeah, and
settings.
it's not just psychologists that can help with that. Like you can have mental health nurses, you can have mental health OT. So it's not just limited to psych. But
In
you can
what
have
aspect? So the community setting you're saying, right? So like that community setting,
yeah, so
mental health nurses. Yeah,
you can
okay. Yeah, yeah.
you can have like mental health OTs and mental health nurses. They can also help with the management
Yeah.
of delusions, for example. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not just psych, but that is kind of like um I know like I guess I guess the kind of like the distinction is kind of the lens, right, in which and where the focus is. Like, am I focusing on the person plus the team, and that's kind of BSP, or am I focusing solely on the person? So let's kind of put this together, right? Let's say you have a psychologist and you have a BSP, right? Now, let's say, for example, the behavior of concern is that the person keeps just wandering. They just leave the house and they just walk away, and then the staff don't know where they're going, right? So then the BSP might be helping to manage sort of strategies within the household, like maybe we're setting up routines, maybe we're setting up schedules, but then the psychologist is more kind of asking the participant, okay, why are you leaving the house? It's like, oh, it might be because I'm feeling really anxious. I just need to get out of there. I just need to like go for a walk. And then you're kind of noticing, okay, well, maybe we need to work on some emotion regulation skills, where you're working specifically with that person. Versus the BSP is kind of thinking, okay, well, what can we do in the house to help this person?
Because I guess the other question is, and this is not a necessarily directly, just because you're a psychologist question, but just in general, I think you could have technically a psychologist doing the behavior support, right? Because
Yeah.
that can happen.
Yes.
Then you've got that skill building side. So technically I think it's more of a question of when to use a line item rather than, I think the distinction you're making is obviously a psychologist is more experienced and I guess acutely aware of the
Like the
the the
disability
psychosocial
section,
disability,
yeah.
right? But the BSP is more better, is obviously more, is that role, I guess, is more designed to allow that person to integrate with their team, their community, their house, seal home,
Yeah,
or
and it's, yeah, I mean, look, I'm making it sound as if there's this very clear line, and there isn't. Like, there's a lot of overlap. The lines are blurred. Like, it's not as if
yeah.
psychologists can't speak to the team. They definitely can. And it's not like BSPs can't teach emotion regulation. They totally can, right? Like, I think where the difficulty comes from is that these roles aren't clearly defined within the NDIS themselves, right? So when you look at the legislation, it talks about like we don't provide clinical care, but we can facilitate. But if we can facilitate sort of like daily living skills, then that's fine. But they don't define necessarily what is considered clinical care. Like that could mean
Well,
anything, right? So it's, and then it's also kind of like when you look at like behavior support, like the scope is huge, right? So it's kind of, I think we still need better direction from the NDIS to create like more of a line between these two roles. But then again, stakeholder meetings, if you just have a conversation with people, then you'll prevent duplication of service because I'll do this
100%.
job, you do that job. You can still work together.
Could I throw out a hypothetical out there that I just popped into my head? Welcome to my brain. There was a discussion a long time ago, where there's been this obviously heavy reliance on occupational therapists to provide a holistic assessment for an individual, right? Where they look at their they look at the person and recommend supports around them, again, very holistically, if that makes sense. Would psychologists for psychosocial diagnoses be, in some cases, better placed to take up that traditional role of an OT, for example, where they've looked at that person? So understood, let's just use schizophrenia as an example. As a psychologist, or even a clinical psych, or whatever the case may be, you would have, I guess, you'd be better placed to understand the potential impacts or the potential delusions for schizophrenia, to then recommend what that model of support should look like around that person. Would that be?
um I think this is where mental health OTs are really important
Mhm.
because they're kind of that bridge between those two worlds of like OT and psych. But like, yes, I mean, psychologists do functional capacity assessments from a psychosocial disability
Because not
lens.
many people know that.
They do, yeah, they do that.
Yeah.
And it's not something I personally do. I wouldn't know where to even begin. That's not kind of what I am like focused on. But it is kind of like you're, my very basic understanding, mind you, is that you're kind of looking at, okay, how does this person's symptoms present? How does this impact their day to day? What kind of supports do we need to put in place in order to mitigate those issues? And then and then also kind of like how can we facilitate that social, and economic participation as well.
Because I mean, traditionally the NDIS isn't funding. They're not funding mental health necessarily, or mental health related
No.
challenges or symptoms. I don't know what the correct terminology is, to be honest, but they are funding things in terms of functional impairment. So they are funding, you know, if there is behaviors associated, like part of that situation for that person, or that, the functional impairment from that diagnosis again is there are some behaviors associated, then
Yeah.
the NDIS are definitely looking at supporting that person either to build capacity or build the capacity around the team around that person. So it is a very, like, essentially it's a that's why for me it's interesting, and like the idea of when psychology would be placed versus behavior support. But
Yeah, so I think maybe if I use like a different example, right? So it's kind of, if you go, sorry, I just I'm just gonna cough for a second. Let's see if we can cut that out. Anyway, okay. If you have, if we go back to what I was saying before about like that 3-tier model, right? Is that like you kind of like when you're bringing in the psychologist, it's more towards when you need that specialized care, right? So if you think about like, let's say for example, you've got someone with OCD, right? And they can't leave the house because they have a 30-minute ritual that they need to do every time they open the door, and that's stopping them from going to work because they're late all the time, and then they're on the verge of being fired. So a psychologist within the NDIS, what they'll do is they will essentially assist in reducing that ritual, right? So that's a very psychology-based skill set. That will, sorry, not skill set, like intervention, that will then deliver to help that person reduce that ritual so they can leave the house faster so that they can go to work, right? That's what the psychologists within NDIS, that's what they'll do. A psychologist within mainstream, their goal isn't necessarily to increase functional capacity. That's just a nice byproduct of their job, and their job is I'm going to go through every single OCD ritual with this person and potentially eliminate that ritual, or get it to a point where it's manageable systematically, one by one. If you then have a better life by the end of it, great. But that's a fantastic bonus. But my job under Medicare is to reduce symptoms, whilst my job under the NDIS is to increase capacity. So
so maybe
so
there's
so
a
yeah.
language,
Yeah.
like, because
So I wouldn't, under NDIS, I wouldn't be going through every single OCD ritual. I'm just focusing on that door one so I can get you work. Once that's sorted, the rest is covered by Medicare. That's where you kind of manage the rest of your OCD symptoms, because that's not necessarily I mean, for argument's sake, let's say for this person, it's not necessarily impacting your functional capacity, but it's impacting your mood, for instance. That's more sort of like Medicare versus a BSP. A BSP can't do that job because this is a psychological intervention, right? That's what we're, like, psychologists are trained to do. And yes, there are other professions that can also kind of step in, and I won't comment on those other professions because that's not my area of expertise. But a BSP, like, they could, for example, like, they could, like, let's say this person's living in a cell, they could sort of like be training the cell staff on, what does OCD mean, what do we need to be mindful of, like how can we not stress this person out, like how can we not add extra burden onto this person, and that's where that role kind of comes in. So I don't know if that
it
helps.
does. I think it's
Yeah.
also very it's also, I guess, contextual. Like, it sounds like the participant. Look, for me, what we're kind of saying is that psychology is specialized, and in circumstances that you would start to, lean towards a psychologist is in those more specialized areas. I have seen psychology funded for situations where, for example, it's a new diagnosis and that person needs to come to understand,
Yeah.
and it gets them to a point. Again, it is very capacity building in the sense of, you know, perhaps they're a new amputee and they're new to this world and they're having to come to terms with that. And there is a little bit, and this is where it gets a bit tricky because technically that's although it's not the focus, there is a little bit of that mental health side that technically gets infused
Yeah,
technically.
but the reality is that because the system is designed to like, or I guess like the logic behind the system is that it wants to kind of cookie cutter everything, right? Like it wants to have very clear, distinct lines and boundaries, and that's just not the way that life works. Like there is always going to be mental health overlap. Like I think it's doesn't make
impossible
any
to
sense.
not.
It doesn't make any sense to just pretend that it doesn't exist, right? Like of course mental health is going to have an impact. And when they're kind of arguing about the duplication of service and how that justifies not having psychology if you have BSP and you can't have both at the same time. I mean, you can argue that there's a duplication of service in literally any discipline. You know, OT overlaps with speech. You know, OT can overlap with physio. It really just depends on what is the goal. And if you have stakeholder meetings, then there won't be a duplication. And it also like it doesn't make much sense for me from like a funding perspective either, because the line items cost the same. So why not give some, you know, a funding amount to the BSP and a funding amount to the psych, you know, like a 50-50? It's still the same amount of money. So like I'm not sure what the logic is here, but I like my suspicion, and this is like totally my own personal opinion. I have basing this on absolutely nothing. But my suspicion is because it's a system where they want very clear defined parameters and very clear defined boundaries, and that people are messy, people don't fit into these well defined kind of like I guess definitions, right? Is that they want to kind of like move psychology back into mainstream because psychology is mental health, you know, like it's I think maybe that's the logic. I don't know. That's my suspicion. It's kind of like it makes it a lot more clear cut. And then and the BSP is NDIS because BSP is a very uniquely NDIS thing. So
I think look, obviously now I'm just talking potential solution here that may or may not have any weight, but I think I guess for me as a non-clinical individual, and this is always a conversation that has to be had because I'm not a psychologist. My team aren't psychologists. And I've always said, okay, well, I'm trying to think about when it, like, you know, you can have a conversation on from a clinical perspective about what is what and why and how. But I think for me, potentially, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, you know how they used to have two different line items in behavior support, where one was specialist behavioral intervention and the other one was the behavior support.
training.
I think that should have just stayed. And then psychology from the IDL budget or the improved daily living budget out of the capacity building bucket, I guess for me sounds like a better fit for those situations that are purely capacity building. Because I mean, it is the NDIS isn't there to acutely. I use the word acutely because I know a lot of hospital people that I've spoken to use the word acute, but like I guess they're not there to cure a diagnosis, if that makes sense, or they're not there to cure like an OCD or something like that. They're there to build a person's capacity, which may end up having a byproduct of solving a problem for that person, or not. I don't think you can cure it, but do you know what I'm saying? So the psychology out of capacity building for me is like, okay, functionally speaking, you can make recommendations about that particular diagnosis and what a potential model of support would look like for that person. I think a functional psychological assessment, if that's a word, and then also that context of, well, a person's just got a new diagnosis. You're like, you can help them by giving them strategies and build their capacity to understand their new world or their new reality, so that they can re-enter re-enter life, for lack of a better word, or re-enter the community without those, you know, potential barriers. Because I mean, it is without that diagnosis or that new diagnosis, they wouldn't need it. Does that make sense?
So you're kind of helping them with their sense of self, their identity, their just self-acceptance. Like, but none of that is considered a mental health illness.
No,
so
I guess it's still
it's
it's a capacity
psychological in
building.
nature. It's psychological in nature, but it's not necessarily a mental illness. So, and I think, so I think what I would really like to see though is that like I see so much on social media, specifically like I think like LinkedIn, for instance. Like I always say, like, what's the difference between BSP and psych? And it's like, oh, one treats mental health and one and the other focuses on behavioral consent. And I'm just like, no, like we can't. We are not allowed to treat mental health under the NDIS. And I think I really like if this podcast sort of does anything, I really hope that message is sort of understood. We don't treat mental health under the NDIS.
That was one of my questions, actually.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But it is an interesting conversation to have, because I think there's a lot of, and I think this is, I guess, why we wanted to have these conversations, because we talk every day about differing opinions, and sometimes I come to you and go, hey, I thought this, and you go, well, no, actually from my perspective it's this. And I think it's something that needs to happen more consistently and all the time. Out of curiosity, what is I would assume that behavior support is more prevalent in terms of funding approvals. Is that right?
Oh, I mean, yeah, like I've
From your
seen from my perspective,
yeah.
there's been so many times where they'll have psych and then psych is removed and then it's BSP, and I'm finding, and again this is just like my very very small sample, is that they're almost overfunding BSP, like, but then removing the funds for other services. So it's kind of like, oh, we're going to get rid of all of this stuff, but I'm going to double what you asked for in your like quote. It's like, well, I can't do this job by myself. Like, I work within a team. Like, that's kind of the core tenet of BSP. So, and I've been finding that. I don't know if that's just an isolated sort of thing where that's what I'm seeing. I don't like you see
No.
so many more.
Well,
Yeah.
that actually brings up a question. In terms of the purpose of a BSP, and I guess will somewhat answer your question as well in terms of how I'm thinking. Do you think in some cases that the upskilling of staff could potentially solve some of the funding concerns that that care provider has? So, for example, a
Yeah.
well-placed, well-skilled, well-trained workforce,
Mm.
trained by in this case, obviously, we're talking about psychosocial diagnosis, people with, that do have some behaviors of concern or challenging behaviors. I think that the correct terminology changes, but
Behaviors of
do,
concern.
yeah, behaviors of concern. So, do you think that, like, by potentially the logic there is that having access to a behavior support could then reduce the larger bucket of funding if the skill set is increased? Like,
I mean, it's so hard to say, right? Like on the surface, I want to say yes, because if you train up the staff and you remove the triggers, then logically speaking, you would expect a reduction in behaviors of concern, which then also leads to reduced staff burnout, which leads to reduced staff turnover, and you kind of have more consistency and a better routine, and that's all very good for the
have you had
participant.
cases like that
I have,
where
I have.
that has
I've
been
I've
the
had situations where we've gone and we've trained the staff, and and then that's led to a reduction in behaviors, and then it's led to more consistent staff because the staff are being burnt out and quitting, and then they develop rapport with that participant, and then the participant now has someone that they can trust and confide in, and that's really important. So so yes, it like in those situations, yes, totally. But at the same time, it really depends on what is the function of this behavior, right? Like,
hmm
why is the behavior happening in the first place? If the behavior is happening because this person is a super social person and they want to go out and they just want to be out in the community all day, every day, the like no amount of staff training is going to make up for their CP hours, like they need you're going to get a reduction in behaviors just by facilitating community access.
yeah.
So it comes back down to why is the behavior happening? So that's why it's really
Well,
hard to say.
it would be extremely contextual, naturally, and I'd obviously, and that's with everything though. You could talk about
Yeah.
grey for years, but I mean, anything in this industry is extremely contextual. That's why it's so hard to, and I feel for the NDIS in general and whoever is trying to organize, and because I mean,
It's complicated.
it
Yeah.
is complicated and it's not a one size fits all, unfortunately. And I don't think you're ever going to get it 100% right. It's just impossible. I think what we have to do as a collective is work together to be more efficient and be more closely aligned. I do think that we all need to be more closely aligned. Not 100% thinking all the same way, but just within a more structured framework, or understanding of what we're trying to achieve with the
Yeah, or
NDIs.
just an understanding of like the scope of other people's practice, right? Like I don't know what the other professionals are doing, so it'd be nice to kind of like have a better understanding of like, okay, like what are you guys really good at? Where does that kind of knowledge base end? And then where does that next profession take over from there? And I think kind of having a better understanding of the bounds of everyone's scope would be really good. But I think that like whilst obviously the NGS has a lot of criticisms. I think the reality is that like we are in a better place because the
Oh
scheme
yeah,
is in place,
there
for
is
sure.
nothing
Like,
like it.
I mean, no, and I also kind of wonder because like uh, when did I do my masters? I did it like just before the NDIS came about, so I don't really know a world where it's not there, like professionally speaking, right? So I can't even imagine, like, how do you even get all these services in place without the, like, I imagine people just went without, so it's
Well,
like,
I
I
think
mean, I'm
the
grateful
UK
for my
privately
family
fund
because,
and
yeah, I mean,
local
it's,
LGAs fund
yeah.
in the UK, from what I understand. I mean, we can definitely get someone on to talk
I
about
think it's
that.
definitely, yeah, like
Mm.
private funding, yeah. But I'm just like, I was just gonna say, like, I'm like quite grateful. Like, I mean, like, I've got family members on the NDIS, and like, oh, there's no way they could have afforded it without. So yeah. So as much as I have criticized, I also just want to put it out there that, like, it's not all bad. But
I guess we all
yeah.
care so much that we really want to make it sustainable. I think those that have been in the industry for quite a long time understand that sustainability is 100% required. I guess we're all invested in making sure that there's a balance between quality and reality. And so sorry, sustainability, quality, and reality. I think
I
those
think
are the three.
yeah, yeah. I think what would really help is just like a more open dialogue um, between sort of the NDIS and the people on the ground, because it's so confusing. Like, I like, what do you want exactly? Like, and I'll do my best to kind of meet that. But like, I find that, like, for example, like progress reports, like, I never know whether one's going to be successful or not. Like, and it's very similar cases. It's just, anyway. So I just think that kind of, it would be nice for there to be a little bit more of an open dialogue. But I guess maybe kind of, hopefully, in my very ambitious way, this podcast will kind of like facilitate some of that, because we can get a whole bunch of people from different places, and and they'll have an open dialogue in that sense. So
I mean, that is the plan. To have conversations with people, learn, share that information, and also share our journey of learning. Going through the next steps of learning for ourselves. But I'd be very eager, now that you said that, to talk to someone that what their experiences are, for context in other countries, about how they support their disability community and what that looks like, and really compare how well the NDIS is doing, because I think often we're all so eager and so passionate to support our community, and we're always going, we need this, we need this, we need that, but there needs to be a balance. It's like, at the end of the day, and then I guess I always like to put things into perspective in terms of how lucky are we? Is there somewhere else that's doing it better, that we can implement some of those ideas, or are we the leader? Which, from what I'm gathering in my limited sample, that there is
yeah.
nothing really like the NDIS out there at this
Yeah,
stage.
no, honest, I don't know. Like, I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't really know what everyone else is doing overseas. But yeah, but it'll be really interesting to kind of hear what's going on.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, I guess, to kind of close out the conversation, I guess, in for future episodes, is there anything in particular that you're wanting or hoping that, you know, potential listeners are getting from this?
I mean, I guess I think it would be really interesting to maybe, like, when we get a little bit more organized, put out a poll, see what kind of, like, if we know like a certain topic's coming up, like what kind of like really interesting questions people have. Like, I love the idea of, like, there being like community engagement. And I guess yeah, like, if people kind of come away from this having learned something, that's really, like,
Mm.
that would be amazing. And I guess, like, as we kind of get used to this idea of like interviewing, or other people and speaking amongst ourselves, like, I hope that we're able to kind of like talk in a way that's understandable. Because I'm worried that, have I just spent the last 40 or so minutes just waffling on and not making any kind of sense? So,
I mean, no doubt we're gonna look back at these early conversations, and be like, oh Lord. Like, I
oh,
remember
so
when I first
embarrassed.
started
Yeah.
my journey in the NDIS, and I look back at my work when I first started compared to now, and I was like, oh wow, there's a difference. Like, how much I've learned in the 7 years or whatever it is that I've been in this industry. I'm no doubt we're going to apply the same logic here. Um,
Mm, mm.
is there
Yeah,
someone,
totally.
or is there a particular topic that you're hoping that we cover, or some dream ideal person you'd love to talk to?
Oh, my dream person is like someone high up in the NDIS who can
Ah.
tell us what's going on. I don't think that'll happen though, but like, I think I'd be really keen to kind of speak to some researchers and see what the cutting edge sort of research is saying at the moment. I think, I mean, it's very basic, but I just really want to speak to other professions. Like, what is the mental
Mm,
health OT doing? What's the dietitian doing? What's the
mm,
speechy doing? Where does that kind of like, are we accidentally kind of overstepping into these other territories where it would be better to be like, oh, okay, is that where that sort of territory starts? Okay, I can hand that off to someone who knows a lot more than I do. Because I think it's hard to know what you don't know.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So like, so for example, like, if we're kind of going into the realm of communications, like is kind of like doing basic key signs under BSP, is that okay? Or was that not now a step too far into kind of speeching? Maybe speechy should take that over. So like I that's what I would really like to kind of have some clear bounds as to, and I think that will be, best determined by those other professionals. Yeah.
I agree. I'd love to deepen understanding of different professions. I think if anything, this conversations will help me be better in the space to help people. That, I mean, if anything, I'd love for that. So, but is there any other closing remarks or anything you want to say?
No, I just hope that this has been enjoyable to whoever, the one person out there listening. So, that's my
It's
goal.
just for
One
us.
listener.
We're
Yeah.
literally just, we're the only ones who are going to listen to it. We're gonna send it to our family and friends so that they understand, and that's it.
Exactly. That's it. Success.
Um,
Yes. keep,
um,
keep the expectations low.
well, I guess then thank you everyone for listening to the or tuning into the first episode. I don't even know what to call it, episode. But if there is anything, we're not even sure when this is going to be directly released, but if there is any particular topics you want to hear from or any questions you may have for either of us, um, um, please reach out. I mean, we can send some details of contact information later, but just reach out to us, and we're happy to help. So, but yeah, thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening.